Hi, this is Mike from Sentry Security Systems, and today we're going to look at some of the setup options for the IP cameras. So we're going to concentrate on the ones that are typically used in the majority of installations. If we go to the camera that we want to configure, right-click and go to IP camera setup. We'll give it a sec here and we'll get a new screen opening up shortly with some additional options. So you've got some tabs across the top as well as some buttons along the bottom for configuring your settings. So the first tab is the server tab. So where you're going to be able to set up your network settings like IP addresses, usernames, passwords, that sort of information. Typically you'll be able to leave that at the default settings. Under channel, there's two different buttons, radio buttons here, main and substream. Okay, your mainstream is what you're going to get for recording. So for example, we can change the resolution to 720p if we want to save on bandwidth, and then maybe set the quality to bad if we're having bandwidth issues again, or if we've got a gigabit connection and we've got no issues, we could set it to best and 1.3 megapixels. The bitrate, we do recommend that you usually change that to variable bitrate to let the DVR control the data transfer speeds of the cameras. You also have the option of going to substream. Substream is going to have a much lower resolution. It's typically what you're going to get over your phones. So if you have a slow internet connection, you're going to want to put these settings down quite low in order to support the remote connections. This particular camera is not a PTZ, but if it was, you'd have some control options and preset options for PTZ cameras in here, as well as your focus, zoom, iris settings, and then control, so left, right, up, and down. Sensor is where you're gonna, if you're getting into sensors, you're gonna be able to configure the scheduling and presets and policies for the sensors. Alarm setup is the big one. That's the one that you're going to configure. Typically, in most installations, the only thing that you're going to need to change. So you want to make sure your schedule is set for around-the-clock recording. So 12 o'clock to 11:59, so right around the clock. And then under copy to, we're going to go down to every day and press copy. Trigger record cameras. So if camera 1 detects motion, you may want cameras 2 and 3 to start recording as well. Typically cameras 2 and 3 would just be set up for motion and you wouldn't need to do that. So you would leave it at just camera 1, but the option's available to you if you want to configure it in that way. Under motion detection, we've got different levels. So low, medium, and high, and highest, as well as lower and lowest. So from 1 through 6 for how much motion is required before it's going to start to record. You want to also make sure this little yellow box is outlining it. That means that it's detecting motion from within that box. If we press clear, I can set it so that only this area for motion, and then draw a second box there. So it's basically going to ignore everything in here as far as motion goes. Once we're done, we'll press save, and that's going to upload the settings into the camera. Down here along the bottom, we've got some options to adjust the time and restart the camera and upgrade it and all those sorts of things. We've also got an IE setup button, and if we click on that, we're going to want to go exit and then minimize the DVR software so we can see our Internet Explorer window. And we'll log into the camera. Now, one thing that you do need to ensure you do in order to be able to log in and access the camera correctly is go into your Internet Options, Security, Trusted Sites. You want to set it all the way to the bottom to low, and make sure that your camera has been added as a trusted site. So we'll close back out of there. Now we've got our live view, but we can also go to Setup. And we're going to get some additional options in here that are not available through the program. So we can do things like disable the day and night mode, switch by a different time period, force it to always be in color, etc. That's one of the more common ones. We have the options of flipping the camera depending on how it's installed, if it's installed upside down. Under the video tab, we've got some more options for the mainstream and substream. You want to ensure that you leave substream enabled. If you do disable that, it's not going to work over the remote video. Again, we've got some networking options, very similar to what's available through the program, but with some additional options for Bonjour, multicast, etc. Event, and then video detect is where we're going to be able to set up our motion detection. So we can click on here to enable it, and then save our changes. Now, working period, if we go into here, we can actually specify that the camera is only going to detect motion during certain time frames. Okay, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's the only time it's going to record, but the only time it's going to detect motion. And then we've also got area, which is similar to what we had available to us through the program, but in here it gives you a little bit more flexibility on creating areas. A little bit easier to use. Under storage, some cameras have the availability to have SD cards in them for recording video. You can set up the schedule, recording control, etc. within there. Typically that's not going to be used. Under system, and then general is where we can specify the device name, date and time, and then whether it's going to use NTSC or PAL. We also have the different accounts for the system. So we've got 2 admin accounts by default. So if you lock yourself out of the admin one, you may be able to log in using the 6 8s, so 8 6 times. We also have the option to backup and import the settings for the camera, and then to upgrade the firmware. If a firmware update is required, we can make that available to you. Thank you for watching the video.